Hello, welcome to this week's episode of the Academy. Today we're going to be rounding out the rest of Sun Tzu's Art of War, Chapter 13. Now, it's a relatively normal length chapter, about 30 some odd sentences, but if you first read through it, you're not going to think it really applies to tabletop much. You'd mostly be correct, but as I read through it, I figured I wouldn't even do anything on this chapter, but I realized what he was actually getting at and why he was talking about this stuff. The chapter's title is The Use of Spies. Now, that doesn't really apply to, I don't know of any tabletop game that really utilizes this. But let's go ahead and read through sentences basically 4 through 12, which I think give us an idea of what he's after. And there will be a couple sentences within here that we can kind of expound on. And maybe we'll get some out of it. Alright, let's see. Let's go ahead and start. So sentence 4. Thus, what enables the wise sovereign and the good general to strike and conquer and achieve things beyond the reach of ordinary men is foreknowledge. Now this foreknowledge cannot be elicited from spirits, it cannot be obtained inductively from experience, nor by any deductive calculation. Knowledge of the enemy's dispositions can only be obtained from other men. Hence the use of spies, of whom there are 5 classes: 1. Local spies, 2. Inward spies, 3. Converted spies, 4. Doomed spies, and 5. Surviving spies. When these 5 kinds of spy are all at work, none can discover the secret system. This is called divine manipulation of the threads. It is the sovereign's most precious faculty. Now, having local spies means employing the services of the inhabitants of a district. Having inward spies, making use of officials of the enemy. Having converted spies are getting a hold of the enemy's spies and using them for your own purpose. Having doomed spies, doing certain things openly for purposes of deception and allowing our spies to know of them and report them to the enemy. Surviving spies, finally, are those who bring back news of the enemy's camp. Alright, let's stop right there. Now, all this is about foreknowledge, or understanding the enemy's dispositions and intentions. That's really what it's about. Getting information about what the enemy is intending to do and where they are. Now, that's when I realized that this use of spies back then, made complete sense. This is the only way to do it. Cavalry was not, it was present, but it was never employed in practice for the use of gathering information, much like later wars. So really this chapter, even though it's about use of spies, actually has more to do with reconnaissance. So I'm going to take that tack at this. Let's see what we can learn if we look at this from the perspective of reconnaissance. Okay, so it's all about foreknowledge. Now, in the game setting, there's a few different factors we got to consider where this could apply. Now, this is really open for debate, but just hear me out on this. Let's look at a few different ways of looking at this. The first one is in the use of different scenarios or campaigns. Okay. The second one is use in tournament settings. Okay, and finally, actually in game systems themselves. So those are the 3 we'll kind of take a look at. Let's do them in that order. So first, let's look at scenarios and campaigns. Really, spies and reconnaissance. Those are elements that happen really out of the battle, outside of the battle, in preparation for a battle. So they are ideally placed within the rule systems around a campaign, or even scenarios, rule system around scenarios. You could even develop a scenario where you have an advanced recon force engage something, and based on what happens in the scenario, they come back with a certain piece of information or not. Okay, so we can look at it from that perspective. The reason you're doing reconnaissance, remember, is to understand where the enemy is, what they're made up of, and what their intentions might be. If you find an enemy in a static position, you know they're expecting to hold the ground. If you see them building up their forces, you know what they're doing, that they're probably going to launch an offensive. If you see them moving, you have to kind of do some discerning of what might be going on. But anyway, those are the things you can kind of build into scenarios and campaigns. So let's look at the second thing in the tournament setting. Now, there's ways to do this. There's a whole deception angle here in the spies. We're not going to cover that. I want to be relatively ethical here, but I'll let you guys delve into reading this yourself and maybe applying things to information exchanges within a tournament. But here's what I'm looking at from a tournament competitive perspective. When you have a situation where you're going to be facing an opponent and you don't know what they're bringing, you have absolutely no time to kind of mentally prepare until you can see it on the table in front of you. If there's any way that you can get an advanced look at lists, even gauging who you might be opposing, watching other players, looking at the different games, assuming you have a break in there somewhere where you can get a look at the different armies. If you have a way of kind of gauging who your most likely next opponent is going to be, you can get a look at what are they bringing. You can talk to their previous opponents and see how did they go about fighting in the game. What was their tactics? What was their preferred approach? What was their primary unit? What tricks did they try to use? What was their way of prosecuting the game? Okay. Now, that is different formats allowed you different ability to actually get this done. But the earlier you can find out who your opponent's going to be and look at their list and get a feel for what you could be up against, the more time your brain has to kind of process through what if scenarios and get comfortable with the idea of going up against maybe that thing. Because I guarantee you, if you are suddenly faced with something you didn't expect, you're going to have to process through very quickly that whole panic phase to get through how am I going to deal with this. And that could take time. If you learn ahead of time, you have more time for your brain to process through that information. You may come up with some ideas even well before they get there. And that's one way to use this whole your reconnaissance perspective. Now let's look at the last one, the actual in the game. Now, there are some scenarios in some game systems that do provide some sort of hidden deployment or hidden unit mechanism. Okay. Now, in order to effectively engage them, you need to find them out. So you actually need to remember a couple different things. This is something, again, where you've seen this opponent fight the style before, play the scenario before, you kind of know what they're more inclined to do, you'll have a better idea of where those hidden units might be. If not, you actually need to dedicate a piece of your force, hopefully a very small portion, as a recon unit, much in the way of cavalry. Matter of fact, this is what cavalry, in the 1900s was really good at prior to the aerial reconnaissance. They would basically go out in whatever directions the enemy was likely to be and try to find them and report back, especially on their movements. They'd shadow them as much as possible. So that's what you're going to need to do with a unit or two. Make sure it can be mobile. Make sure it has a good line of sight, that it can get out of a sticky situation, so that you can. It also can't be important to your force, a linchpin for. So don't send your most important unit out looking for these enemy units. There used to be systems that were old games, more on hexmat board games. Still. They were war games, down to unit level. They actually had units called scouts, where that's their purpose, to go out and find and engage, or not find, but engage to actually find the enemy, draw fire, expose where they are, even trying to occupy their space, just so that you can make sure whether they're there or not, so that you don't waste your time moving in a direction where the opponent isn't located. So, if you do run across a system that has these hidden deployments, be conscious about setting up something early in the game so where you can quickly get to the likely areas of hiding to discover where they are before you actually develop your entire battle plan. Because if you don't do that, you may have committed yourself in a certain direction, and these surprise units earlier hidden, now revealed, or in a position that kind of disrupts your plan. It's best to avoid that if possible. So that's really what we're trying to get to in Sun Tzu's last chapter here. Again, not a whole lot to do with tabletop in the sense of spies, but there's some things we can gather when you look at this from a perspective of learning, where are the enemy units deployed? How does the enemy like to fight? Okay? All right. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope there was something gained from it. And I really hope you enjoyed the entire Sun Tzu series. Now, this is definitely not the end of the Academy. Over the next couple weeks, we're going to be covering a couple new topics and starting a new series. Now, we'll just wait a couple weeks before I reveal what that is. All right, so share, like, and subscribe, and let me know what you think below. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.